And the title of the sermon this evening is Receiving the Truth. Receiving the Truth. And what I want to preach about specifically this evening is a phenomena that exists where people will hear the truth, they will know that it is the truth. Especially here we see the Word of God testifying to the king's heart. But even in spite of knowing that it is true, that it is from the Lord, they reject it.
Even if there really was a God, no one from any religion knows how to know that. Nor can any of them know that any alleged testimony came from any particular God, much less their favorite one. Yet every religion pretends to know the truth, but it's not knowledge, and it's not truth. If there was one true religion, that would mean that all the others are wrong. At least all but one of them, if not all of them, is lying, irrational, or confused. I know that faith is all about pretending to know things that no one even can know. That's why faith is fundamentally dishonest, and it's inherently autodeceptive. It doesn't matter how convinced you are. Belief doesn't equal knowledge. Faith is not a reliable path to truth, but it's a great way to stay wrong forever and never know it. Otherwise, I agree that some people will hear the truth and know that it is the truth, yet still reject it. Biblical creationists are the prime example of that. I can present any number of objectively verifiable facts on behalf of evolution or deep time or what have you, but the believer will thoughtlessly react by rejecting all of them without consideration, without even trying to verify any of them, because they don't care what the truth is. They don't want to know what they don't want to believe, because they think wrongly that it would change their identity if they were to correct some error in their position. It doesn't have to. It wouldn't for me.
So I'm going to be speaking about why people reject the word of the Lord. Why people reject the word of the Lord.
Well, the biggest reason is because you don't have the word of the Lord. No one does, though many religions pretend to. The Hebrew Bible, the Quran of Islam, the Kitab-i-Aqdas of Baha'u'llah, the Avestas of Zarathustra, the Hindu Vedas, the Adi Granth of the Sikhs, the Mahabharata's Bhagavad Gita, the Book of Mormon, and the Urantia book have all been declared by some devotees to be the absolute truth and the revealed word of the one true God, and believers of each say the others are deceived. Of course, the only logical probability is that they're all deceived, at least to some degree. None of them have the word of God. All any of them really have are books written by mere fallible men, often ignorant, bigoted, superstitious savages who obviously didn't know what they were talking about. But they claim to represent an assumed authority in order to oppress other people and manipulate them emotionally, to extort tithing and yoke labor from them, and send them off to war in the name of whatever God that religion is selling.
Now, there's a prominent apologist. You may or may not have heard of him, but his name is Frank Turek. Frank Turek. And he travels around to different universities and colleges and gives presentations to audiences. And I believe the name of his ministry is Cross-Examination. Is that correct? You guys remember? Cross-Examination. It's very interesting if you've listened to him. I've listened to him quite a bit, and I've listened to him give his talks, and I've heard him talk about this, and I've witnessed this in listening to his speeches. But one of the things he does at the end of his talks is he opens it up for questions. And occasionally, there'll be atheists that are brave enough to come up and ask questions. And when they do, he will first preface their question with a question. He poses a question to them. And the question that he asks them is, if Christianity were true, would you believe it? If Christianity were true, would you believe it?
I met Frank Turek at one of these presentations. I found him to be insufferable, dishonest, illogical. His reasoning was entirely circular, and I told him so on an open mic. I don't remember him asking anyone that question. Had he asked it of me, I would have said probably. Because if Christianity was true, then there would be some way to know that. I wouldn't say that anything is true unless I can show the truth of it, and Christians never can. That should bother them, but it doesn't seem to. If their religion was true, then God is incompetent and unjust for requiring people to believe such impossible absurdities for no good reason, and to maintain that belief against all reason to the contrary. Because then, how do you distinguish between the delusional and the faithful? What's the difference? I've often said that if you can't verify your claims to any degree at all, by any means whatsoever, then you can't even know if you know whatever it is. But if there is some way to show and thus know that any religion is right about some particular point, then yeah, I would accept that. And I would obligately adjust my position accordingly.
And all the time he has people tell him no. They just say no. He says, if Christianity were true, would you believe it? And I have seen, in just watching, just clicking on what some of his seminars, I believe it was the one at the University of Kentucky, I clicked on and listened to, and a guy came up and he asked him the question, if Christianity were true, would you believe it? The guy stood behind the mic and he said, no, I wouldn't. Frank Turek said that that happens all the time.
I can't speak for anyone else as to why they answered that way or what they meant by that, if they really did say that. Having listened to Frank Turek myself, I've come to doubt everything I've ever heard him say. Nor would I answer his question that way. I don't believe in Christianity because it's not true. If it was, and there was some way to know that, I would have a different position. My friend Matt Dillahunty, host of the Atheist Experience, made a T-shirt that says, "I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible." So I don't think he would answer Frank Turek's question that way. Myself, I just don't want to be fooled into believing anything that isn't true. I would rather not have to believe anything. I would rather prefer to say that maybe that's true and maybe it isn't, and withhold judgment until the evidence and arguments are sufficient to convince me. That's how I remained an agnostic atheist for decades, until I had finally enough logic and evidence to know that at least the Bible God can't be real. Or if there is a God, then the Bible is not his word. So I'm not an agnostic atheist anymore. I'm a strong or explicit atheist now. If Frank Turek had asked me that question, I would have to clarify what he meant by believe. If that means that I've been convinced that this thing is true, but I don't know that it is because I can't show that whatever it is, then fine. I could believe in the sense of accepting that to be true, the most likely true or closest to the truth until I find out otherwise. But I find that believers call themselves that because they seem to have a different definition, as if they think of belief as an act of will, of mind over matter, the power of positive thought, to convince yourself of things that are not evidently true, and that can only be done for irrational, perhaps emotional reasons. In other words, faith in any religion is make-believe. Asking in that sense if I believe is asking if I will pretend that that's true, even if I know that it's not and can't be. I've met plenty of Christians and a few Muslims and others who have expressed that that's what belief means to them. And again, I find that intellectually dishonest, being dishonest even with yourself. So I will not believe anything in that sense, not even if it's true. I prefer understanding to belief. Your understanding may be imperfect, it may be flawed, but it can also be improved in different ways, whereas belief is typically binary. Now, where you hold to this or you don't, which I've seen, makes it harder to admit or correct error.
There is a very famous atheist, at least in the online YouTube community. His name is Aaron Ra. He's very, very famous.
I don't know about that, but at least this preacher got my name right. That rarely happens.
And Aaron Ra was interviewed one time by a Christian apologist, and Aaron Ra, just professing, his own beliefs, not even asked that exact question, said, if God were real, and if God were true, and furthermore, if it was the God of the Bible, quote, he said this, quote, I would not worship it. Trying to be blasphemous, of course, by saying it. But he said, I would not worship it.
If God existed, at least the way Christians and Muslims describe it, then that would be awful. I mean, existence would be pointless. I mean, why would we have this one instant to exist and then be judged for all eternity over that? And on the most absurd of extremes, with infinite rewards versus infinite punishments and nothing in between. And what are we being punished for? Whether we were gullible enough to believe wild claims unsupported by anything. If God existed and the creationists were right, then nothing means anything anymore. Transitional fossils don't mean anything. Radiometric dating doesn't mean anything because footprints no longer mean that anyone walked there. I mean, if evidence doesn't mean anything, then we may as well say that we live in a matrix that was created last Thursday. The worst part of the Abrahamic God is the eternal judgment. It wouldn't matter if you're going to heaven or hell because both amount to an inescapable eternity eventually, and there's no way to just let it end. Christopher Hitchens described heaven as a celestial North Korea, where he said that at least you could die and escape North Korea. Imagine getting into heaven with the Bible God, a telepathic despot, so that you can't even think what you want to without your thoughts being monitored and potentially punished. I think heaven would be like being trapped forever in a house with little Anthony Fremont, that kid from the Twilight Zone. That's basically the same character as what the Bible describes. So if God existed for real, that God, the Abrahamic God, I would be able to accept it in the way I've come to accept all other uncomfortable realities if God was real, and all of us, even Christians, are lucky that it's not. If it was, would I worship it? Why would anyone worship anything? Because I understand it, to worship something like a god is to profess love and devotion and to swear obeisance, allegiance, and service, to show submission by bending the knee or the back or both, and to praise and praise and praise some more, as if stoking some inexcusably insecure ego. Another problem is, how do you do all of that with a character like the Bible God, who has always shown such deplorable judgment and who is responsible for so much evil and hatred indefensibly, without excuse, according to the myths and legends in your favorite folklore? Yeah, I know that, God's ways are not our ways, but that excuse would only work if God's ways were better than our ways, which they're not, and I think everyone knows they're not. Even by his own admission, allegedly, according to the sacred fables, he gave us laws that were not good and by which we could not live. If God was real, if God was God, the one and only uber-galactic overlord, creator of all things everywhere, it wouldn't care what we, the pets in his ant farm, what we thought of it or whether we praised it or not. And yes, I call God an it because it doesn't make sense to refer to it as a gender when there is no alternate gender, at least not anymore. Not since the mythology changed, and almost nobody but a very few Bible scholars remember Jehovah's wife. It wouldn't matter to God what our opinion of him is, nor would he want us to cut up our genitalia in his honor. That's only hurting yourself and your children. It's not doing God any good. Beings that really exist and that really have power don't need your assurances. And they don't need you to do their work for them either, especially not if they're omniscient and omnipotent. Nor do they need you to believe in them. And nor will they punish you for not believing in them, especially when it's their fault that you don't believe in them. If God existed, but it wasn't the Bible God, or if the Bible was wrong about God, and the God that exists is better than the Bible God or the God that is described in any of the other various supposedly sacred scriptures, regardless of religion, then maybe I'd have a higher opinion of that God, but I still wouldn't worship it, because any being worthy of worship would not want to be worshipped. And if anyone demands worship as a term of your relationship with them, you should end that relationship. Even wanting to be admired or loved is a sign of weakness. Maybe not in all cases, at least not always in humans, but certainly when we're talking about the infinite Almighty.
There are people in this world, and to a Christian that has sought truth and found truth, it may be hard to wrap your mind around. But there are many people in this world that do not want the truth. They do not want to receive the truth.
You don't have the truth. You have a fundamental misunderstanding. I doubt that any Christian has sought the truth and found truth, and yet they're still Christian. Again, it seems as if we're using a different lexicon, where you are asserting things that are not evidently true, nor even possible, that you want to convince yourself to make believe, and you're calling that truth, where I would call that very thing a lie, that what you have perhaps deliberately claimed as truth is in fact false, not true at all. Abraham Lincoln once wrote something that I completely agree with when he expressed his belief in an established maxim in morals that he who makes an assertion without knowing whether it is true or false is guilty of falsehood, and the accidental truth of the assertion does not justify or excuse him. Thus, justly, it is dishonest to assert baseless speculation as if it was a matter of fact. Yet that is what all religions do. And like I always say, that the truth is what the facts are, what we can show to be true, not whatever else we might assume or imagine beyond or instead of that. Christians don't like that definition, and the reason they don't is obvious. Because just as Frank Turek allegedly asked atheists, if Christianity was true, would you believe it? I've asked a few Christians the reverse of that. If Christianity was not true, and you knew it wasn't true, you had proof that it wasn't true, would you still believe in it anyway? I haven't asked that many times, maybe only half a dozen times that I can remember. But whenever I have asked it, the answer's always been yes.